As a preliminary matter, this is Brian Sullivan, Chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Dave Iverson.
Here.
Rima Sherry.
Here.
Tom Dixon.
Here.
Meg Browers.
Here.
And Brian Sullivan is here. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Ellis Ramos.
Here.
Tucker Holland.
Here.
Vicky Marsh.
Here.
Great, thank you. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. George Ruther.
Here.
There we go. Great. Thank you, George. I think we may be potentially expecting Judy to be joining. I'm not sure. That was kind of a maybe. She calling in from DC. We'll leave that open. Good morning. This is an open meeting of the Affordable Housing Trust. It's being conducted pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Affordable Housing Trust is convening via video conference via the Zoom app is posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating via video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using posted agenda unless we note otherwise. We will turn to the first item on the agenda, but before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for clear and effective conduct of our business to ensure accurate meeting minutes. The chair will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment or questions or motions. Please hold until your name is called further. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking, and please remember to speak clearly in a way that helps generate accurate meeting minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their name, be acknowledged, and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote will be conducted via roll call. I will check. I see Penny, Shanta, and Judy all just joined. Can I check microphones, Penny?
Sorry, yeah, present.
Great. Shanta?
Here.
Great. Judy?
I'm here.
Great. Thanks, Judy. So with that, let me move my page, get to the agenda. So I just received an email from Alice that the previous meeting minutes that you had sent, you want us not to review and move to a future meeting. They're inaccurate.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
You will get them by the end of today, and then we can approve them on August 8th meeting.
Okay, so knowing that, I would suggest we amend the agenda before we approve it to move item 3 to a future meeting. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
And a sec, okay, motion from Penny to move item 3 and second by Rima by roll call. Let's see, everybody moved around. Dave Iverson,
Yes, aye.
Rima Sherry,
Aye.
Tom Dixon,
Aye.
Penny Dye.
Aye.
Everybody just moved again. Shanta Murphy. Maybe it was Shanta that moved off. Meg Browers.
Aye.
And Brian Sullivan's an aye. So with that, I will look for an approval of the agenda, a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
So moved.
Second.
And so moved by Dave, second by Rima, by roll call. Dave Iverson,
Aye.
Rima Sherry,
Aye.
Tom Dixon,
Aye.
Penny Dye,
Aye.
Meg Browers,
Aye.
and Brian Sullivan's an aye. Alice will note that we lost Shanta. Approval of minutes. Okay, so that takes me to item 4, public comment. Are there any members of the public that would like to make comment? Brooke Moore? Welcome, floor is yours.
Hi, yeah, hi guys. I just wanted to make sure everybody took note of the fact that ACT now has announced that they're launching a rental subsidy program with a firm called Placemate. And what they're going to be doing is Placemate assists in the technical backgrounds, like background checks, lease creation, etc. And will be a subsidy offered to folks who've been doing short-term rentals to bridge the gap between their revenue from short-term rentals and what they would receive on a long-term year-round lease. And they're doing this with private funding as a pilot program. And it's, to my mind, an extremely exciting opportunity for the community to see if there's appetite among short-term renters to convert to year-round when they have technical and logistical support to do so, as well as some financial subsidies. So I just want to make sure you all knew about it and that you were talking about it in the community. So.
Thank you, Brooke. I personally have only seen a headline, Ellis. If you could reach out to somebody there and get kind of the program guidelines to share with the trust members so we understand the program a little better and are able to speak about it, that would be incredibly helpful.
Will do.
Great, thank you. Megan Perry?
Thank you, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Excellent. I was just curious. I was unable to attend last night's lecture at the Athenaeum, and I was just curious if during this the future agenda item for the deed restriction programs, if you would be allowing any public comment and or questions during that.
So the portion of the evening was excellent and well attended, and the Athenaeum did record it, and I'm not sure how to get that, but I'll make sure that Ellis figures that out and gets you a copy of the recording so you can watch it, because there were some good questions and discussion.
I appreciate that.
I'm still answering your question. No problem. We will work through a working group for the trust in today's conversation, and then if we have any remaining time, we'll open it up for questions from the general public.
Okay, so there is the potential for some questions. I appreciate that, and I'm sorry I just couldn't make it. I actually drove around for 45 minutes trying to find parking because we're just so popular. So thank you so much.
No problem. Mary Mack?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
All good.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I saw the lecture last night and it was just amazing. The guy is brilliant. Such a good idea, such a great idea. And I also wanted to say that I'm glad Brooke mentioned the Placemate thing, and that ACT now is taking that project on. And I also wanted to say that it was originally my idea, and I brought it to you all in the winter, and I worked pretty hard on it and connected you with people from Placemate, the co-founder Kai Frolick. And I just wanted to say that I'm glad ACT Now is doing it. I hope it succeeds. I'm excited about it. But I would also, like a nod to myself in helping it to come to fruition. I think that I deserve that.
Mary, you do deserve that, and thank you, because it takes a village to push this giant rock uphill, and everybody's support, energy, and effort is appreciated. So thank you.
Well, thank you. It's just nobody has said anything, and I have to say this in order to remind people that you need to give credit where credit is due.
Well, you deserve it today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Holland?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and yes, credit to Mary, and thank you, Mary, and thank you for being there last night. I just thought I would do I want to, I know we're going to be hearing from George here momentarily, but I just wanted to say thank you again for his presentation last night and for all of the folks who turned out and asked just some terrific questions. It really was, an extremely valuable event. And as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, the Athenaeum did record it. They will be sending us a link to that, and we'll make sure that we get that distributed so that folks who could not attend have that opportunity to hear what George shared. So thank you again.
Great. Thank you, Tucker. Once you, there we go. We're still in public comment. Any other members of the public or any members of the board as members of the public? Seeing no additional hands, I'll close public comment and we will move to item 5. So a discussion around the year-round deed restriction advisory committee. I'm not sure kind of how to open this or start this. I think, George, I'd like to look to you if you could give. Do you plan on presenting the same presentation as last night, a summarized version, Cliff Notes?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. George Ruth with the Town of Vail. Thank you for including me in your conversations today. I appreciate it. I do need to share that the hotel's Wi-Fi appears to be down today, so I'm working off of my hotspot. And hopefully I have enough bandwidth to share everything I want to be able to connect. And I'm not sure I'm going to have bandwidth to run a PowerPoint. So no, I'm not going to go through and with last. I really,
George, I'm going to stop.
Focus my remarks more specific.
George, I'm going to stop you. Unfortunately, your hotspot is not performing at peak level. Penny?
Yeah, Brian Sullivan, through you to George. Are you at the Nantucket Hotel?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so my office is diagonally across the street, and you're welcome to come over here and set up in our conference room if you want and use the Wi-Fi here.
Could I actually do that? I'd be happy to do that if you guys can jump ahead maybe on your agenda. I'll head over there, Penny.
Yep, perfect. It's 82 Easton Street. Atlantic East Real Estate.
I will be there as quickly as I can get over there.
Okay, second floor. I'll meet you.
Penny, thank you for providing a
Okay.
solution. George, thank you for being flexible. Okay, so in George's absence, I think maybe I will come to Judy so we can continue in this item on a high level and then bring George in for his presentation. Judy, does that work for you?
Yeah, it's fine. I confess I may have been a little bit confused about my role today versus when we're meeting, I think next week, at least, unless I've got my whole world turned upside down. But I think what you had asked me to do the last time I saw you was to try to put together sort of a schedule that assumes the working group and how we get from here to December, which, you will certainly have by then. But I do think we need to talk about this working group issue and how to make sure that on the one hand, you get the input you need from people in the community, and at the same time, not bog the schedule down overall, because I understand there's an urgency to get this done.
That's accurate, and you are accurate that it was the next meeting. So if we can just cover kind of schedule goals and then sort of advisory group goals and kind of go from there, and then hopefully George comes in and we can learn about their successes.
And that's totally fine. I mean, I think what I would like to ask you, because you've clearly had experience in Nantucket forming other working groups, some of which have had a little more success than others, but I'm just wondering, what ideas, what has worked for you folks in terms of making it a reasonably efficient process? in terms of getting some broad community involvement, or at least seeking it out. And I think that's the other thing too, to sort of keep in mind is, it's one thing to seek out broad involvement. It's another thing to hold up the process in a way that could be a problem. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts. I mean, I sort of do, but I'm wondering what has worked for you folks in terms of being able to actually get involvement outside the usual suspects.
Thank you, Judy. So I'll open that question to board members. Seeing nobody jump on it right away, I will. Oh, okay, hang on. Rima, go ahead. You were about to.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that we turn it over to Tucker to describe our process for Neighborhood First as far as advertising, nominating the volunteers and getting started.
I think that's a great idea. I will say that Neighborhood First was a successful program. It had a clear goal with a specific timeline. So that I think was critical. And not letting great get, or not letting perfect get in the way of great is important. So with that, I'll take Rima's suggestion and turn to Tucker.
Thank you. Well, yeah, so I mean, just briefly on the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee, Rima sort of outlined it there. We had, put out advertising, if you will, for interest in serving on the committee. We had, I think we had made a conscious decision. We wanted both year-round and seasonal representation, as well as representation from certain areas of the community, a wide view. So we had conservation view, we had advisory committee view in terms of, seasonal residents, financial department input, and so forth. And so we, that was a very effective committee. And as you said, Mr. Chair, it had a very focused goal and a defined timeline, and subject matter expertise involved here in terms of developer and real estate experience. I was going to say, Judy had asked about other, in general, successful processes that we've had. And I actually would point to the effort that Judy led with Jen Golson on our housing production plan. I think that was a very, we were very interested to get as much and as broad public input to that process as we could. And so we, in that case, determined we could achieve that goal by having a couple of public forums where, they were advertised. Everyone from the public was invited to come and on the front end, give their initial thoughts, and then at the second session, react and respond to a draft of the plan at that point. So there were sort of, a beginning and end to that process. And in addition, which I felt was particularly important and beneficial, is we established, and Judy, you can remind me, 6 or 8, roughly 8-person focus groups with very intentional invitation to those focus groups from, again, a range of perspectives, very wide range of perspectives. And it was important to hear, not from, as someone said a moment ago, like the usual suspects. We wanted to hear from voices that we didn't usually hear from, perhaps, or maybe even, aren't necessarily advocates for housing. We really wanted to hear from everyone. So I thought that was very well done and turned out, a very good product.
Sorry. Any other members of the board? Seeing nobody jump on it. Brooke, Moore?
Hi, guys. I have some thoughts about this. Some of the things that have changed in terms of town communications to the public is the use of the Zen City platform for surveys.
Mhm.
And I think that that resource that's now available to you that wasn't when we did Neighborhood First or even the Housing Production Plan creates a much greater opportunity for outreach into the communities, multilingual communities and other
Right.
than trying to populate a committee with those people because of the time commitment involved in serving on a work group. And I think that having a core group, as Tucker said, present something to evaluate, a proposal to evaluate, and then to establish some really well-worded surveys that can go out in multiple languages and be promoted into the communities that may or may not have the time or are unlikely to have the time to commit to multi-meeting work group situations. And I will say that Neighborhood First was a huge success story, but when you looked at the diversity of that group, it was not diverse as to race or ethnicity at all.
Right.
And so I think asking people to commit hours of time to a work group is very hard, whereas participation by survey, where it takes 10 or 15 minutes, you will get a much broader input from a wider selection of the community if we do it in that way, more along the housing production plan process than Neighborhood First or even what we did with short-term rental. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Brooke. Does anybody else raise their hand on this question? Okay, seeing that, I'll come back to you, Judy. Is that kind of?
Yeah.
You kind of heard from like that both were successful opportunities. I don't know if that drives a decision in the process, but an at-large advisory group worked well in one scenario, and focus groups also worked well. So I don't know if there's a hybrid combination or.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of assumed anyway, Brian, that we would do group interviews, call them focus groups. They're actually not the same thing, but I mean, we would be reaching out and doing some group discussion as part of this, because no matter what the composition of the working group is, you need to sort of get beyond them anyway, bring information back. So I think that's fine. I think the only comment I might make is that it's one thing to seek input. It's another to have a seat at the table when the decisions are made. So I think that's kind of where you need to land on what is it that you're trying to do with this sort of broad participation. Is it to get to as many people as possible and get the input, or is it to make sure that people with a stake in this have a seat at the table? And that's, I think, what the decision comes down to. And also then the implications for the timeline of trying to form this working group.
Or ultimately the program.
Yeah, right.
Right, like it's ultimately working backwards from the program.
Yep.
Meg Browers.
Yeah, so can we clarify as a group right now what the makeup of the committee or the work group will be? Are we still thinking of doing any at-large community members? Are we thinking of just doing Affordable Housing Trust members? Where are we with that? And as a follow-up statement, I'm personally would recommend and prefer that we do include some at-large community members and strategically ensure that we have representation from different demographics on the island.
So I think, Meg, that's we're in the place of discussing kind of both situations at the moment. And there's no, we haven't made a consensus call yet to understand where everybody sits on it. I lean into the at-large group as well, as my personal opinion. At a certain size with some members from the board. Again, when we discuss time commitments, we have a lot of projects in front of us, and to add this one additionally, I would hope that we could get some outside assistance and help from members of the community. That's my personal opinion. Judy, is it a goal coming out of today to make a decision on which direction to go?
Well, it would be helpful, only because
Okay,
for
great.
me to kind of put that schedule together for you and some issues for Tuesday. boy, it would be great to have some direction from the trust.
Great, so so if I'm hearing everything collectively, it's one way, if I can pitch this to the board members, one way would be the board would have additional meetings on a schedule of potentially 6 meetings focused on this topic, that focus groups would come in and participate in some way, shape, or form is option A that was considered. And option B would be similar to the Neighborhood First Committee, where there are some number of members from this group and then some numbers members of the at-large community that would then come back with recommendations to this board to vote on. So I guess that's option A and option B. And so we'll be looking to kind of get an idea of the board members and how they would lean into that. Shantai, so you raised your hand.
Thank you. Apologies for not speaking earlier. I was in the middle of a parking war, so I'm parked
Oh,
and in my office. But I think thinking about the time constraints that we're under to get this done and the difficulty in putting together a work group in itself and finding people to commit to the time to do it. I'm leaning more towards the trust being the group that's making the proposal on how we're going to get a diverse group of people to share their opinions, is then putting together these focus groups, specifically requesting members of the various communities that make up our larger community to be a part of the focus groups that we're getting their opinions. And then we go back, present a proposal to them and have them weigh in on that. I think that's a great way to cover the diversity aspect of it, that we're really trying to ensure that we're hearing from all voices on the island, but we're also ensuring that we have people who are dedicated, and I shouldn't say dedicated, but people who are knowledgeable on the issues that we're facing and who are have been committing the time to it and have the time to commit to it, that we're really the ones doing the heavy legwork, as we were the ones who put ourselves out there as being interested in doing it, but we're also getting others involved. I think that kind of, I guess I feel like that's the best way to split the baby, if you will.
Okay, thank you, Shanta. Penny?
Yeah, just George is over here and he's just setting up in the conference room. Just to
Great.
let you know. So watch for him, whoever's letting people in.
I think he just
Yep,
joined.
he's in. Okay. So I guess it feels like we should maybe, I don't know that it's a vote, but maybe it's a feeling of the board to see who's interested in an option A scenario, which is the hybrid Chantal just described, or an option B, which is a neighborhood first. So we'll do a hand raise on option A. So I see Dave with a hand raise on option A for a hybrid, Chantal. And Meg. Okay, so we've 3 leaning that way, and then option B, an advisory group scenario of numbers of members at large. So we have Penny, Rima. Mike, I appreciate your hand, but I'm not counting it. And then I'm in option B. And then Tom, I have nothing from you, kind of feeling it out. Or you might be frozen.
No, I kind of lean towards A.
Okay. So
Sorry,
it seems like as a group, we're leaning in the direction of A. 4-3.
is A the hybrid?
Yeah.
Yes.
B's neighborhood first, A's the hybrid.
Okay, I voted wrong, but I'm really on the fence, so.
Okay. It's a temperature feeling. It's not a vote. Dave Iverson.
Yeah, I think I want to explain why, for me at least, is, and I've had a little experience in the work group thing. I might have a little PTSD. But I just feel that it would be more expedient to do it within the group. And with that said, I 100% embrace outside influences on us. And I think we should do informational sessions and gathering of people's thoughts and feelings. I just I think when we start to pick from the community, it slows down the process. Don't get me wrong. We're doing this for the community, and whatever they say is very important. But I just feel that it's more expedient if it's done within the group. Thank you.
Rima, then Tucker.
Yeah, through you, Brian, to Judy, how do you feel about surveys? Personally, I thought that, using surveys in multiple languages might be really helpful.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've done that a lot, and we have used Zen City on one of our master plan projects right now, so I'm familiar with it, but there's other tools as well. They can be useful as long as people understand they're a vehicle for participation. They're not, we don't ever turn the input from those surveys into some kind of statistical representation of what people in the larger community think, because it's not fair. But it is a vehicle for participation, and it's important.
Well, if we go with A, I would strongly suggest that we utilize the surveys in as many languages as they're available.
People do get survey weary. That's my only comment. So not knowing what else is going on in Nantucket right now that may generate surveys, just think about whether that could be an impediment.
I think it's been a while. I haven't seen any online lately.
Tucker, then Meg.
Thanks, Brian. Rima, you didn't fill out the transportation survey recently. You need to do that if you didn't. But I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Like, we really want the best of both worlds. As Dave said, like, we 100% want strong public input from all corners of the island and the year-round community, and even seasonal community to some extent. But so what I was going to suggest simply is why don't Judy and I, since it seems like it's a very close, if you will, viewpoint on the right path here, why don't Judy and I lay out a schedule for option A and option B, and sort of what that looks like under either scenario, so that at our meeting on Tuesday, which is when we really plan to do this, we can have a further discussion, and hopefully one jumps out as the way to go then.
Great. I think that works. Meg, do you take your hand down?
Yeah, I think I'm good.
Okay. Okay, so hopefully that steers enough of the conversation to put something together that we can review for the meeting on Tuesday in writing, and then take an action on then. With that, George is now connected, stronger Wi-Fi. Thank you, Penny. George, I'll come to you for maybe a screen share and presentation of the successes and struggles you've had in Vail. Thank you for coming and sharing your experience.
Of course. Well, again, good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. A bit of a adapt and overcome, but looks like we were successful. So thank you. I appreciate that. I think when I last left the conversation, Brian, you were asking about kind of my remarks today. No, I hadn't intended to kind of reiterate a lot of the information I shared last night. Again, I think that was recorded, and as Tucker said, will be available. I was hopeful today, however, at your direction, to share some of the information more specific to the Vail and Deed program, the actual deed restriction program, and speak to that. And I have just 6 or 7 slides that I'd like to run through, kind of communicate some of that information, and then answer questions if that's kind of what the group is most interested in seeing.
That would be the most productive for us as we are moving in the direction of creating some sort of group, as you just heard, to develop a program of our own that would fit the needs and standards of Nantucket. Would love to learn more about how you created yours from the ground up.
Great. Well, then in that case, if I'm able to get permission to share my screen here.
I'll look to Ellis or Tucker for that. I don't have an answer.
I just made you a co-host. You can do it now.
I can do that. Let me get this opened up. And I trust everyone can see that screen now.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, great. Again, thank you for the opportunity to kind of share my remarks here today and for the fantastic hospitality we've received while we've been in town. I thought last night was a fantastic opportunity, great venue to share some of the information. And as I share with the group, simply being invited out to ask it and see the participation that we saw last night kind of demonstrates that this is clearly an important issue to the folks here in Nantucket. So thank you. I wanted to speak today. I'll just start real quickly to set a little bit of context and background to my remarks, and then kind of jump right into the inner workings of the Vail and Deed program. But really, Vail and Deed came out of our Vail Housing 2027 strategic plan. And again, I just want to point to this because I think this document in this strategic planning work that we did fundamentally changed the way the Vail community thought and thinks about housing today. Prior to the Vail Housing Strategic Plan, it was kind of singular in focus. We were focusing only on workforce without a lot of conversation about sustaining and maintaining and creating community through these deed restriction purchase programs. But the plan, again, the plan was pretty straightforward. It's very clear, very concise, short in length. It establishes a goal, a means, and a method. The actual goal that we set out to achieve was to acquire 1,000 additional deed restricted properties within the 10-year period of time by 2027. When the plan started, we were right around 700 deed restricted homes. So therefore, our objective is to achieve 1,700 deed restricted homes by the year 2027. As I shared with the group last night, we are currently on pace, and while some folks thought this was more of an aspirational goal than a truly achievable goal, we are on pace right now to realize our housing goal by sometime in 2026. So I anticipate we'll have an opportunity to update some of this goal information and set some new bars to shoot for in the future. The actual means, when we talk about the means actually is the money. A program like this, and we talk about deed restrictions, we only create deed restrictions when we have funding available. So we use housing program funds and capital project funds. Housing program funds can include anything from mitigation impact fees to general fund appropriations provided for by the Vail Town Council, to the incorporation of a recently adopted sales tax increase that dedicates 0.5% of our annual sales tax collection towards helping us solve this housing issue within the Vail community. We also use capital project funds to actually build some of these new developments. The method is what I like to talk about probably most importantly. While it's the least sexy, if you will, about what we do, it truly changed the approach in which we sought to achieve this result. The decision-making structure we determined needed to be singular and focused, proactive, empowering, with very much a results-oriented focus. And because we're dealing with real estate in many regards in the ever-changing marketplace around real estate, we had to be nimble and adaptable enough to be effective in achieving our goal. And as I often share, singular and focused, proactive, empowering, results-oriented doesn't often describe the Vail Town Council. And I say that with all due respect and with acknowledgement that the Town Council was self-aware enough to say, yes, we too realize that singular and focused, proactive, and empowering may not be adjectives you use to describe all of the body of work that we have to do. So the Vail Town Council in this regard changed the decision-making structure around a lot of our housing related issues and granted agency to the Vail Local Housing Authority. Through this grant of agency, Vail Home Partners was created, and that is a collaborative partnership that has been formalized and established between the Vail Town Council and the Vail Local Housing Authority. Again, I highlight this just because I think it wasn't just what we were doing, but how we were doing it that was most important to achieving our results going forward. This diagram here on the slide, as we say, a complex problem with what we believe was a simple solution, but this kind of illustrates the problem prior to the adoption of Vail and Deed, and that is roughly, we have 5,300 year-round residents calling Vail home, and a total of 7,200 dwelling units within the community. So obviously, we don't have a housing problem as much as we have an occupancy problem. In the town of Vail, as you'll note, 4,700, almost 4,800 homes within the Vail community are classified by the US Census as being unoccupied. This is our second home, vacation home inventory in the community. So the reality is those 5,300 people living in the town of Vail on a year-round basis, they truly either live in one of the 1,753 occupied homes, or they live in one of the 688 deed restricted homes. What we found after tracking the real estate data on sales of homes within the community, when an existing resident, one of those living in one of those 1,753 homes, when they put their home on the market to sell, it did not sell to another local 9.5 times out of 10, which is nearly always. Instead, it sold to that pool of buyers in the unoccupied homes category. And what we realized, because land is such a scarce commodity in the town of Vail, again, we're not an island, but we may as well be, since we're surrounded by US Forest Service property, much of which is wilderness area, and we couldn't grow and expand our municipal boundaries if we wanted to. So we identified that, even if we tried to build our way out of this problem, we were never going to do so because of the scarcity of land and because we could not replace the existing homes that were lived in by locals that were being sold and then subsequently purchased by our vacation or part-time residents in the community. So we needed a solution that was going to protect and preserve and take better advantage of the existing 7,200 dwelling units that we already have in the community. Again, we don't have a housing problem, we have an occupancy problem. The outcome of that was the Vail and Deed program. And Vail and Deed is very straightforward, in my opinion, in its approach to addressing this problem. We talk about it not being your typical deed restriction program. Many of the deed restrictions that the town has required, we acquired from the private sector as a result of some form of development obligation. So it was a regulatory requirement. Vail and Deed is probably the most public and private partnership you'll come across because it is a non-regulatory approach. This is 100% voluntary program between the property owner and the town of Vail in the purchasing of these deed restricted properties within the community. Again, the program is simple. The town of Vail, in exchange for financial consideration, a purchase price, we buy a interest in that real estate. The interest that we purchase in the real estate is in the form of a deed restriction that is placed on the property. The deed restrictions in the town of Vail by and large have a couple of terms associated with those, and that is an obligation for a minimum of 30 hours per week on average of employment on a year-round basis in the Vail community, and that the income is derived, 75% of a homeowner or property residence income is derived from that business that's located within Eagle County. With the program, it is truly a resident only occupancy requirement. There are no income limits that are placed on the property. There's no price appreciation cap, and there's no family size requirement. The reason being, from our perspective, our housing challenge and our housing crisis is so significant that it spans the entire spectrum of the housing market within the community, from the most seasonal of seasonal workers all the way up to longtime local professionals residing in the community. So we sought to take kind of an all of the above approach with these deed restrictions, make it a resident only occupancy requirement with the belief in understanding that we were essentially creating two separate real estate markets within the Vail community. There's the market that the locals will buy, sell, and trade within. That's the deed restricted market. And then there's the market that the second home and property owner market will buy, sell, and trade in. And those two pools of buyers will never intermix. And so much of our challenge that we found with housing in the Vail community is when a local, even if a local wanted to try to compete for home ownership or home occupancy with an out-of-market buyer or renter, the realities of the economics in the situations behind it are such that a local can't even compete. We got to a place where I think I heard in the conversation last night, we got to a place where the vast majority of our real estate transactions in the town of Vail are now cash offers. Sellers will not even consider a financing contingency as part of a sales contract. That in itself does not lend well to a local buyer, looking to purchase a home in the market, especially when they need to acquire financing. So the deed restriction question I'm often asked is how many of these deed restricted properties have you acquired through the program? To date, we've acquired 174 properties through the program. These are deed restrictions that, but for the Vail and Deed program, we would not have otherwise had within the community. In many instances, these homes were prevented from moving, actually doing what the objective they were set about to achieve, which was to prevent them to going into that second homeowner market and protecting and preserving some percentage of our real estate inventory for local home ownership. Who buys and sells these deed restrictions to the town of Vail? We sought out believing that most of the sellers of deed restrictions would be actual home buyers, and they would use the deed restriction purchase as some form of down payment assistance or purchasing assistance to acquire the property. We also believe that some percentage of our sellers would be long-term investors, people who are simply looking for opportunities to rent long-term, not short-term, but rent long-term within the communities. What we were most surprised to find out, however, was the number of sellers that approached us who were existing homeowners as well as business owners. We've for years been trying to find a mechanism or a venue for our business owners to participate to a greater extent in helping address the housing problem within the Vail community. But let's be honest, business owners have sometimes have very different missions and levels of expertise when it comes to their professions and to what they're doing. Being a landlord or a real estate developer isn't something that comes natural to a restaurateur or a shop owner in the community. So Vail and Deed has been used by many of our business owners in the community to actually help them acquire property that they turn around then and rent back to their employees, often at a significantly subsidized rate. The again, questions we often get asked is, well, how did you determine the value of a deed restriction purchase? When we started the program, we spent a significant amount of time speaking with anybody in the real estate business, whether that was brokers or appraisers or lenders or home builders or property investors, et cetera, to try to get an understanding of what was the financial impact, that discount in value that a deed restriction will have when placed upon a property. Because our deed restriction is really a resident-only occupancy requirement with a limited amount of employment and income limitations associated with it, most people believed early on that it was somewhere in that 15 to 20% discount against fair market value. Fair market value, in our opinion, was it wasn't that coming up with a formula of A plus B equals C, determines the deed restriction value, but instead, because we were buying a piece of real estate sells on a fair market value, being willing seller, willing buyer. So each one of these transactions, we negotiate the sale of the property using many of the same criteria you would use in selecting any other residential real estate for purchase. Again, that landed us initially in that 15 to 20% range, with the range really being closer to 15 to 17% of the fair market value. As interest rates have continued to rise and home prices continue to escalate, we are now paying more of our purchase prices are around that 20 to now even 21 and pushing a 22% of the fair market value of the property. Again, asked, how did you get the word out on the program and how do you communicate and market and message the program? We did set aside $15,000 to put together some marketing materials and media, et cetera. We did not even get out of the gates. It's all been just word of mouth. I haven't spent a single dollar besides maybe a couple $100 on some print publication for our Veil and Deed program. Word of mouth within the community and some social media was used to kind of spread the message about the program, which netted us these 174 deed restricted properties. Just real quickly, kind of the program numbers since inception, we've done 88 transactions to obtain those 174 deed restrictions on the properties, meaning some of these transactions had multiple deed restrictions associated with them. Since the program began, we've acquired about 146,000 square feet of gross residential floor area. That's the total floor area in the community. In the way our community development department determines building area within our zoning code. Expenditures of about $12.5 million or about $83 per square foot for the cost of a deed restriction. If you have any experience developing residential real estate in the Vail market, you would know that I cannot build deed restricted homes or even come close to building deed restriction homes for $83 a square foot. In fact, I can't even buy the land, I believe, in most instances for $83 a square foot to build these homes. So we believe it's a very cost-effective approach. Is it our only approach? Absolutely not, but it's one of many approaches we take, again, to address the housing issue within the community. The last piece of information I want to share off of this slide is, to date, we estimate that about 361 Vail residents have been provided housing, whether it's home ownership or for rent opportunities within the community as a result of the Vail and Deed program. A little bit of contrast to share: our Timber Ridge development, which is a apartment development that the town of Vail purchased. Long history to it, but I will just share, we purchased that apartment development for $20 million to protect and preserve the deed restriction that was on that property. Timber Ridge provides housing for 288 people for $20 million. Vale and Deed provided housing for 361 for 12.5 million. Now, a little bit of apples and oranges there because we do have an asset to go along with the Timber Ridge buildings. But I think, again, a very cost-effective and very timely approach to providing deed restricted homes for our year-round residents in our community. Some of the lessons that we learned from the program, you know, with our Vale Housing 2027 strategic plan, we got very clear and very concise about what it was we were trying to accomplish. If you look at the Vale the Vale Housing strategic plan, you know, I know a lot of time is often put into trying to quantify and understand and dig deep into the actual housing needs within the community. Well, we kind of took the approach and said, we have, again, needs across the entire spectrum. We could spend the next 18 months analyzing the problem where instead we want to spend the next 18 months identifying solutions. We're still in a place where there is very little we can do with our resources that won't have a very positive impact on housing in Vale. So our belief was that while we were adopting a strategic plan, we needed to really just get to work to identifying solutions and getting those solutions implemented. But again, we got clear about our mission and what our vision and what our values would be around this. And I think those three things, the clarity around mission, vision, and value, why you're doing this, helped us understand what our objectives were, helped us understand what it was we were trying to accomplish, and helped us get the results that we're starting to see. The Vale and Deed program, I like to share, came about because our decision makers decided to be bold, to think differently and take some risks, to try and do something that wasn't being done in other places around the country. Vale, like probably Nantucket, but I know like Aspen, Park City, Breckenridge, Jackson Hole, you name the resort community, we have development impact fees, we have inclusionary zoning requirements, and we have commercial linkage obligations. But like all of those other communities, we also have a housing problem. So I think what that shared with us was that while we have those tools in place, those tools were not achieving the results we wanted them to achieve. So we had to think differently about the problem. Again, if you subscribe to that notion of you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and getting different results. Like I often share, we were about as crazy as they come, because that's exactly what we were doing. We were doing the same things over and over again and trying to figure out why we still had a housing problem. Vale and Deed was all about, you know, taking a risk, trying something new with the understanding and commitment that if it didn't work, the worst thing that happened for all of us is we simply go back to doing what we were doing in the past. Some additional lessons, you know, funding is policy. In 2018, the town did adopt 10 new housing policy statements. Of those 10 statements, there's real no order of importance other than policy statement number 1, which speaks to housing as infrastructure. And housing as infrastructure, just like roads, bridges, streets, utilities, emergency services, et cetera, within the community. Again, with the understanding of knowing that when it comes to budgeting, infrastructure always gets the first dollars, and the rest of the spending tends to be more discretionary. So if housing was determined to be in the infrastructure, then housing would realize the funding necessary to, again, begin addressing some of these results. Deed restrictions are a real estate asset. I mean, I think this is something that should not be overlooked. You know, when the town is making this investment, and I think that is the way we look at it. We don't spend money on deed restrictions, we invest money on deed restrictions. In 2019, we did an economic values and community benefits analysis to try to quantify and qualify the town's investment that they were making in deed restricted housing. And at the end of the day, we were able to determine that for every dollar we spent, the community sees a return on that investment as a percentage, as a financial return, as well as a kind of qualitative return on some community benefits, meaning we have people to sit and serve on our boards and commissions, and children in our schools, and fewer cars on the street, and all sorts of other benefits that are indirect and less able to quantify. But I think that's an important piece. And again, we have conservatively estimated that our financial value of deed restrictions, the paper, not the physical improvements, we have about 65 to $70 million worth of deed restricted asset in that community. And one day, we are currently working with some bond counsel right now on how to leverage those deed restrictions and that real estate asset to actually create more deed restrictions in the future. So that may be Vail and Deed 2.0, and I may be sharing some of that information with you in the future. But again, an important lesson we learned was, we weren't just spending money, but we were investing money, and we kind of took that mindset to it. The last thing I'll kind of wrap up with is the development risk. From our perspective, the town of Vail, we as a municipal government and municipal organization, we do a lot of things really well. We run a great fire department, library, emergency services, et cetera, et cetera. What we're not is we're not the best real estate developers. There are real estate developers out there in the private sector. And what we should be doing is looking to the private sector and their expertise that they can bring to the table to help us deliver new product to the market. So we sought this Vail and Deed program because when you think about it, there really is little to no development risk associated with it. We're purchasing deed restrictions from existing homes that are already built within the community. So we know what our capital outlay is going to be when we make that purchase. It is a contractual agreement. We get what we bargained for in that deal. There is no such thing as a cost overrun or a change order with a Vail and Deed purchase. And then lastly, I guess, keeping it simple, when I talk about being clear about your objectives and your mission, vision, and values, each time as we were putting this program together, we were at the crossroads of having to make some decisions around how to best implement the program. We use this notion of keep it simple, a program that was easy to comprehend, easy to understand, easy to implement, both from the town of Vail's perspective, but more importantly from the customer's perspective, would largely lead to the best results going forward. I have worked with a number of communities that I think some of their challenges is I often tell them, you can put as many restrictions on the deed as you're willing to pay for, because that's really what it comes down to. So I'm going to take a break, catch my breath, and allow you guys to answer or ask me any type of questions you have about the program. Again, thank you for the opportunity to share the information. Since launching this Vail and Deed program, I think we have worked with 26 or 28 other communities now across the country, from as far west as Lake Tahoe to now conversations with you folks here in Nantucket and over on the Cape about a deed restriction program. So thank you. Appreciate it.
George, thank you very much. That was great. So what I'd love to do is work through the board, and people will be able to ask direct questions of George, and we'll move from there. Penny?
Yeah, thank you. George, it feels funny asking you when you're in the next room, but if you could just elaborate, what year did you start the deed restriction program?
We started in 2018.
Right before the pandemic, a year or two before the pandemic?
Correct.
Okay. Were you impacted by the pandemic in any way, positive or negative?
Absolutely. We were impacted pretty significantly on a negative basis. With the pandemic, one of the things that we all saw was that rapid rise in real estate prices. We saw real estate go up as much as 40% within the community. So stuff that where we had potential buyers who were on the cusp of having maybe the financial wherewithal to make something happen with a Vail and deed purchase, even though we were maintaining a 20% contribution, the 80% still just priced people out of the market. Then the interest rate rise that has followed since has had a significant impact. As I shared, Penny, we are seeing now an increase in the town's contribution, but it's almost getting to the point where real estate prices without a larger contribution are just unattainable. Hopefully, if interest rates can moderate, we'll see some more folks coming back, but the program has definitely leveled off with this most recent change in the real estate market and the economy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Penny. Dave?
Thank you. George, I'm speechless. I mean, I think you've accomplished what most people on this meeting have dreamed of for many years now. And appreciate the roadmap. I just a couple questions really. You guys, do you have any sort of occupancy restrictions as far as how long you have to live in that house once you buy?
No.
Nope, none at all.
No.
You have zero
no.
restrictions.
Correct.
And that's
There's the employment restriction, Dave, so you need to
I
be
guess
employed.
that covers
Yeah.
a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. But there is no restriction on how long you need to continue to reside in the home after selling us a deed restriction. I'll clarify.
Okay. But the 30 hours stays in
Yes.
effect.
Oh, yes.
And then if you were to guide us, did you have a lot of naysayers? What were the pitfalls along the way? Who consistently showed up at your meetings and said, no, this is foolish? How did you deal with that?
Sure. I think as I shared with some folks last night, so I apologize if you've heard this already, but interestingly enough, when you chart a path forward, you are kind of creating your own way forward, and not everyone from the outset or onset of what we were talking about doing believed that this was something that even had any value, and question why someone would even want to sell us a deed restriction. So yes, there were plenty of naysayers. Regrettably, I will share with you, Dave, in all honesty, some of the biggest critics were from within our organization at the staff level, questioning why the town would do something, as in their opinion, as foolish as paying for deed restrictions. But we persevered. We kind of stayed the course, again, with the understanding that what with the tools we had in place weren't getting us the results. So we had to try something, uniquely different. Did we know from the onset that it was going to be as successful as it was? No idea that it was going to be that successful, but we were committed, to trying. Some of the bigger challenges were, communicating the message, understanding, why would somebody want to, place a deed restriction on their property. I think to even my surprise and bit of amazement, the number of homeowners, existing homeowners that came to us to sell a deed restriction on their existing home. So they already had a roof over their head. They already had an opportunity to speculate in the real estate market. But I recall specifically a family that came to me, mom, dad, and the 3 kids, and they all sat down in my office and they wanted to learn about this program because they were making a family decision about putting their property into a deed restriction. Their oldest child was about ready to go off to college, and the parents' greatest concern was not only was their son going off to college, but they were fearful that he was never coming back to the town of Vail, because once he left, there would never be an opportunity for him to return. they made a decision to sell us a deed restriction. They were probably some of those folks that said that other people, critics said, would never sell us a deed restriction. And I guess, you know, we have many of those types of examples that I would share.
Thanks. And one more, if I could trouble you. Best piece of advice for a community moving forward with this program?
Like I said, keep it simple. You know, don't overthink it. You know, one of the early on conversations was, you know, I had, well, what if somebody sells us a deed restriction, and then they decide to go out and you know, what are they going to use the money for? I don't care. I don't care if they're going to use the money to put improvements into their home, you know, put a new roof on, replace the windows, replace the siding, pay off an upcoming special assessment if it's part of an association, pay for their child's college education, or take a trip to Costa Rica. We were indifferent about that. It doesn't really matter. Focus on your objective. Our objective was to acquire deed restrictions, because once we have a deed restriction, and our deed restriction is in perpetuity, we now have a property for a local to live in. And because it's a mutual covenant that can't be removed without the town's permission, if we never remove that covenant, we always have a property for now in perpetuity for a local to live in. The other piece, like I said, around keeping it simple in the restrictions on the deed, understand, I think, what your objectives are, what it is you're trying to achieve, and place no more restriction on the deed than is necessary to get you to that objective. Again, I talk to communities all the time about, you know, you don't have any limitation on how much you will pay for a deed restriction. Correct, because it's a negotiation. If I don't want to pay what you're offering to sell, I just say no. I've had other communities come back and say, well, we're not going to pay more than $100,000 or $150,000 for a deed restriction. I don't think you have to begin with those types of limitations. You know, give yourself that flexibility, be able to be nimble, as we pointed out, and I think the program would be successful.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work you've done on this. I much appreciated. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for including me.
I'll come to Meg and then Tucker. Mike, I see your hand, but I'm going to work through the board before I go to the public.
Thanks.
Meg Browers.
Thanks, Brian. So I was curious, George, I don't know what the situation in Vail is like, but I'm just going to assume that there's short-term rentals there. And Dave, I hope this doesn't like trigger you right now, but I just want to ask about, how you deal with that situation at all. If you deal with it at all, do you allow any short-term rentals of the deed restricted properties? How, like you say, right now it's 30 hours a week of workforce employment. So you just decided to go with that like parameter and capture those properties. And I know we've had a lot of conversation here on Nantucket and within the Affordable Housing Trust about what about retirees? What about, you know, I don't know, single parents who might not be working a full-time job but have children in the school system but still want to utilize the financial benefit. So how have you had any of those issues? And if so, how did you manage the sort of qualification process?
Sure. To kind of start with one of your first questions, do we allow any short-term rental of the deed restricted properties? No, that is an absolute prohibition. If you want to short-term rent your property, then don't deed restrict it, because that's not the purpose of that. Now, there has been conversation about, well, you know, what if I short-term rent it for just a small percentage of the year, you know, a couple weeks, a month total throughout the entire year, that could financially help me maintain the ownership, you know, of that property going forward. Long and short of it, from a policy perspective, the town council has said no, short-term rentals, not something we're going to allow in in deed restricted properties. The kind of question about retirees, we do have provisions in place within the deed restriction that acknowledge that you know, at some point you may transition in your life and want to you know, retire. We do allow for individuals to retire in place. Again, understanding that the program, while there is a 30-hour per week on average employment obligation, so there's clearly a workforce, you know, expectation from the deed restriction program, there's also a strong component around maintaining and sustaining community. And that means having, like I said, having people living in our homes with lights on. So we allow a person to retire in place, provided they can demonstrate that they have met the terms of the deed restriction for the 5 preceding years, and they're at least 60 years of age or older to retire in place. Again, the question often comes up, well, if they retire and they retire in place, then we lose that person to the workforce, and what are we going to do then? We've just lost another home to our business community. Yes, that's absolutely true, but also understand that fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon your perspective, the deed restriction is in perpetuity. None of us will live forever.
Right.
Thank
That's
you, George.
helpful.
George, can you stop the screen share just so we've got a full?
Oh, of course.
Meg, did you have a follow-up? You good?
I think I'm good for the moment. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm gonna come to Tucker, Shanta, Tom. Oh, Vicky, I see you too. I'll come to you in just a second, Vicky. Tucker?
Thank you, Brian. George, you're obviously building a bifurcated market, you know, a year-round market and then the open market. And so really you're trying to get to a point of, you know, where the year-round market can, in a healthy way, transact within itself. So building inventory is key. Of the 174 units that you brought in, just approximately, how many of those are situations where the owner was already living in the unit and is continuing to live in the unit with the deed restriction now on it, versus situations that are, I'm going to say new, where like a new year-round living opportunity was created? Perhaps it was down payment assistance in effect for someone to buy in. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Great question. I would say, Tucker, it's probably somewhere of the existing homeowners, somewhere in that 10 to 12% of the total. So it's a very small percentage. The vast majority of the deed restricted properties that we acquire are properties that otherwise would have been free market properties and now are protected as new housing opportunities for local residents going forward. A good percentage, and again, we the other piece of this, Tucker, I'll share, is we did buy a number of deed restrictions from some existing business owners that had these properties. They were renting to their employees. Again, the question is, why would you pay them to do what they're already doing? Because tomorrow a for sale sign could have been put up in those properties. 9.5 times out of 10 were shown to would have been lost. So a percentage of that remaining, 90%, there were some business owned properties that were already rented that we purchased deed restrictions on.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to come to, did I lose Vicky? I think I lost Vicky. She probably had something to say before she had to go, but she's gone. So Shanta.
I'm just thinking about compliance issues. Have you ever had anyone that you've had to go in to talk to them about the lack of compliance in the program? who've offered to, who simply, and I remember last night you said, you know, you guys offered to, you know, if you don't like it, we'll buy the home from you and you can move on. But have you had anyone who simply said, I'm not selling you my home, I'd like to sell back the restriction? Like, is it
We have.
revocable?
Yeah,
Okay.
we have it. In kind of to your first question, you know, have we had the, yes, we enforcement is a key piece. And as I shared last night, you know, that probably as much as anything is what keeps me awake at night, because we are investing taxpayer dollars and we're fiduciaries of someone else's money. Ensuring compliance with the terms of the deed restriction is important going forward. And as we amass more and more of these deed restrictions, the obligations, you know, the weight of that just gets heavier and heavier as you go forward. So I would, you know, I do always recommend that however you acquire your deed restrictions, that you have a very strong and consistent enforcement and verification process in place. The second part of your question about, you know, it is a mutual covenant. So the town of Vail, you know, has the ability to release that covenant. We do have a program in place that will allows property owners to exchange the deed restriction, but it is entirely discretionary, you know, from the town of Vail's perspective. As I shared with some folks last night, the evolution of our deed restrictions in the town, we do still have some deed restrictions from the earliest years back in the 80s and 90s that spoke to, you know, if it's rented, it should be rented, you know, to a local, that kind of language. I kind of term those as the underperforming deed restriction, because while it's a restriction in place, it's not required to be rented. We go out and we actively seek, we're down to about 18 of those left in the town of Vail. We go out and we seek those property owners out to sell that deed restriction, exchange that deed restriction. We have a program in place, Chantal, that allows us to exchange that depending upon the location and the circumstances. Again, it's discretionary, but there's some parameters around it. We exchange that at a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio on a square footage basis. So if you have a 1,000 square foot home that is deed restricted, you want to have that deed restriction released, we will entertain an offer to release the deed restriction, provided you give us back 2,000 or 3,000 square feet. So there is a significant multiplier that is put in place. There was a time when we would actually take a payment in lieu of an actual deed restriction exchange. We don't do that anymore. We don't want the money, we want the home. And but there were times where we were seeing some of those exchange rates where I was getting $300,000, $400,000 to release a deed restriction, and then I would take that money and go buy 3 more deed restrictions on other properties. But again, we don't want the money, we want the restriction. But yes, having a program in place, I think, is important because you can leverage it to your benefit.
Chantal, any follow-up? Good. Okay, Rima, then Judy.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, George, you talked about the creation of Vail Home Partners. We, as an affordable housing trust, have constraints on what we can do concerning affordability. So this program, you know, without any income limitations or requirements, did you have to create a separate agency from the housing authority and able to do this? I'm just wondering how we, you know, under our charter could create something like this.
No, we different dynamics in place for us. No, we did not have to create a separate agency to administer this. We did have to, by resolution, the town council did have to formally grant some agency to the Vail Local Housing Authority to act upon on its behalf in certain circumstances in on certain situations and under certain sets of criteria that were, you know, defined. But no, that was the extent of some of the steps we had to take to grant that agency to the housing authority for them to appropriate and spend the money on the town's behalf.
Thank you.
Do that.
Thank you, Rima. Judy?
Hi, George. It's a fascinating program. I'm really interested in what you've done. I just had a couple of questions for you. One is, in addition to requiring someone to work in the community X number of hours a week, do you keep any kind of demographic data as a program on who is buying or renting the units that are part of Vail Indeed? It would just be interesting to me to know what sort of kinds of workers, or are there any particular industries that are tending to benefit from the provision of this program? And the second question I had, which is a little bit far afield from what you're doing, but I am curious, does Vail itself have any kind of development regulations that provide incentives to developers to create, as part of their projects, some year-round, some units that would be restricted in effect for year-round residents? So you've got the financial mechanism you've talked about, and I'm wondering if there's any development tool that Vail is also using to address this. That and the demographic question are sort of my two issues or concerns.
Sure. Yeah. The demographics, more anecdotal than kind of quantified, but again, a good percentage of our sellers were individuals making either their first or second home. When I say second home, the second house they were buying, not a second home.
Right.
So they had a little bit of equity behind them to participate further in the program. The vast majority of our buyers fit that category. Many of them are young, upwardly mobile, financially professionals within the community. It is kind of that missing middle piece of the program that we have in place. Interestingly enough, we a great number of our buyers, kind of that mid-level manager, or again, upwardly mobile person within their profession. We have had, I get criticism about selling and buying deed restrictions from some doctors in the community. But these were young doctors, which meant, yes, they had a bright future financially, very likely, but they had a current debt structure that had them in over their heads. That's the vast majority of the demographic. Again, then we had a surprising number of businesses. And I think that was when we created a conduit for businesses to participate and begin to provide a solution towards housing that up until this point, they were kind of at a loss. Clearly they needed it, but and clearly we wanted to help, but the town could not be the sole subsidy of that program. The second question you shared around development incentives, we have a number of development incentives, in place, whether it's density bonuses or square footage bonuses. But I think, and as I shared in my remarks last night, one of the things we lean heavily on the private sector, with the understanding that if we don't have the participation from the private sector, the development community, to do this voluntarily, not as a development obligation, but voluntarily help us develop some of these new opportunities, then we're going to be left to do it all on our own. And so we created some incentives. I think the best incentive that we created, and one that we're now working on, is we created a zone district that granted a substantial amount of flexibility to the developers, so they had some greater control. As you know, in the development business, the lack of control creates risk, creates the uncertainty. Having a little bit of that control is what helps developers, get their head around doing this project. The other piece that I think is even more important, I think every one of our communities should be doing because it can come to us at absolutely zero cost, and that is amending our development review and entitlement processes to not only shed risk from one another, pass the hot potato from one another, but to actually eliminate that risk. Hold ourselves accountable, create some shot clocks, if you will, around review processes and review timelines, getting very clear and concise about, expectations and submittals, remove whatever layer of discretionary decision-making isn't working or isn't necessary to achieve our objectives. I'm always surprised to see the 5 or 6 prescriptive requirements, with a period at the end of the sentence that says, or anything the commission deems is necessary.
Right.
Well, if you subscribe to the notion that I think the opponent's greatest strategy in any review process is delay, and delay costs time and money, you get rid of that kind of stuff. And I think we could get and attract more private sector participation to be successful. And then lastly, I'll just wrap up with in the Vail community, we rapidly recognize it's not a bad thing for a developer to walk away with some money in their pocket. I mean, let's be honest, that's why they do the business. Risk equals, or margin equals risk, right?
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. Vicky, I knew you jumped off and I didn't know if you had your hand up because you had to jump off or you have a comment now that you're back, but I want to give you the opportunity.
I'm really sorry. I know something happened when we changed the screen sharing and everything. It just totally disconnected on my computer. So I apologize. And I don't know whether someone's already asked a couple of questions that I have for George or not, but George, just tell me if you've already addressed it and I can try to follow up separately. So I'm town council actually for the town of Nantucket. And I work very closely with the trust as well as with the select board. So a couple of questions. These restrictions are not income related, is that correct?
That is correct.
So do you have a sense of how many, of what kind of levels of affordability are the families that purchase these restricted properties? Are they tend to be on the lower income or higher income, or you really haven't tracked that?
No, we have tracked that to varying degrees. And with the home purchases, it does tend to be, above 140, 160% of area median income. Not surprisingly, I'm not sure that the Vail Indeed program can provide enough financial subsidy or assistance to make home prices affordable to someone in the 60 or 80 or even 100% of area median income. However, with the rental, situation, I think that is where Vail Indeed is having its greatest impact with those employers and with those businesses and those long-term rental investors that are renting to that segment of our population, our residents that are maybe not financially capable yet of making home ownership a possibility, but need a rental availability situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So the other thing I guess I wonder is from a legal standpoint, how do you have like a bylaw that governs this? Have you, is it in the general bylaws? Do you have something like that in Vail, or I'm not sure how you've codified this program?
The program itself is not codified, so we don't have a, we don't have an ordinance that established the program. The program was established by resolution. The deed restriction, however, again, a mutual covenant between the town of Vail. But no, there was no obligation for us to amend our town charter for the town to own real estate in the community. Again, there are provisions that talk about it's the town council's obligation and responsibility to buy, sell, trade, transfer, exchange community property. So these deed restrictions are a town-owned asset. That's why we were required by resolution to grant agency to the housing authority to act on the town council's behalf. But it was, simply one reading of a resolution granting that authority.
And the last question I have really has to do with, so in Massachusetts, we're trying to get through some definitions having to do with year-round restrictions. That hasn't exactly been defined clearly by Massachusetts law. There are some bills before the legislature now, but does Colorado have anything like that that you have to comply with as far as year-round restrictions, or there's nothing in the state laws that you're trying to comply with?
No, and again, as I shared last night over there, we're still a bit of the Wild West, where we just assume the folks in Denver stay in Denver. The legislators that they stay down in Denver will take care of ourselves. But that is a message that is coming our way. The governor right now in his administration is taking on this housing issue seriously across the state, and has more or less said, either you municipalities at the local level begin to address this housing issue in a real way, or the state is going to step in and kind of exert some of our influences, upon you. Right now, Vicki, about the only oversight that the state is going to have in local control is if we were to use state funds, whether that be a grant or a loan to acquire the deed restrictions, then that always comes with some strings attached to it. Interestingly enough, I had a meeting a week ago Friday with the governor and some folks from his office, and reminded him that everything that the town of Vail is doing and all of the money that we have invested, we haven't seen a single dollar come from the state of Colorado, even though $500 million has come into the state. We're still waiting for our turn, but apparently we're too wealthy to be considered yet.
No. So out here in Nantucket, and in Massachusetts, we do have state laws that we sort of have to, make sure that we're complying with. But we're also, I'm sorry. And we're also at the point where we are trying to get compliance with the bylaws in the town of Nantucket. So that's another area that we have to really draft for and provide for in order to create this program.
Sure.
But this is very helpful, really. You provide a lot of information here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicki. Tom, come to you.
Yeah, just real quick. George, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. I highly admire the work you've done in Vail. Just a quick point on what you said Governor Polis said about Colorado. It sounds an awful lot like what California is doing, is forcing cities and towns to do things to basically start building. It sounds like in Vail you can't do that because you're landlocked and there aren't a lot of places to build. So that Vail might be sort of exempt from that. I'd just be curious of what, would that, if what the governor wants to do in Colorado, would that affect you at all from what you're seeing?
Yeah. In a great observation, Tom, because that has been our issue. Many of the examples that the administration shares comes from some of those larger communities along the Front Range of Colorado, in and around Denver, where the ability for urban sprawl and expansion is happening, and they want to see more of these homes in more product type become available within communities' land use, regulations. And that's been our point. We're not Weld County. We don't have endless expanses of what is agricultural land today to be eaten up by urban sprawl and residential development. We are landlocked by U.S. Forest Service property. We've also shared, it's not that we're unwilling to subscribe to some of this stuff, but you have to make it kind of resort relevant. And it's not just Vail, it's Vail, Aspen, Steamboat, Breckenridge, the Crested Butte, the whole myriad of resort communities, and recognize that housing is a challenge. It's a challenge for everyone across the state, but a one-size-fits-all approach isn't probably gonna fit.
Great, thank you, Tom. Do any other members of the board have more questions? Seeing none, I'll just ask, I don't necessarily need to ask it again, but George, last night, I did ask about the efforts working with the banks, kind of understanding the equity position and the restriction on the property kind of changes and your willingness not to subordinate to a mortgage. Can you just kind of explain how you retrained the banks in your area to work with you in this scenario?
Sure, and I think that that's an important piece. That was kind of caught us a bit with our pants down moment when we went out with the program, because in order for Vail and Deed to be successful, we need lenders to lend on deed restricted properties. That's the most important piece. When we started out this process, not so hard to do for a number of reasons. I'll share with the group. Our deed restriction this is an absolute, our deed restriction by process in agreement, our deed restriction shall always be in the senior position in the chain of title. We don't want any junior position for fear of losing our interest, our investment that we've made should there be financial distress or some other issue that allows a lender to strip the deed restriction from the title. So we're always going to be in the senior position in the chain of title. That's simple on transactions. On purchases from existing home buyers where there's already a deed of trust, we ran into a scenario where we require lenders to sign a subordination agreement, acknowledging that they're subordinating their deed of trust because they did not want to break chain of title, but acknowledging that through the subordination agreement, they are subordinating their lending to our deed restriction. The way we were successful in doing that, because early on when I would get on the phone with a seller's lender, they would just laugh at me. I mean, they'd be like, "You want me to do what? Have you lost your mind?" We're not going to do that. But once we did two things. The first thing, once we stopped talking to the folks in the underwriting department and we began talking to the folks in the business development side of the financial institution, the folks that were in the business of growing the business and instructing the underwriters, we made progress. Because now we were talking to the right people who understood it. The second thing was the messaging around it. And the most important message we share is, while either through subordination agreement or the order of recording restrictions against the title, regardless of how we get there, the town of Vail is not a financial lien holder. So if that property owner were to get into financial distress, yes, we are going to be with the lender on the courthouse steps the day it goes into foreclosure, but we're there for two very different reasons. I don't want to be paid back. I don't want my money back. I just want my deed restriction preserved and to stay on the title to that property. You, the lender, you are still in the senior position as a financial lien holder on the property. So any monies that get distributed because of that foreclosure event, you're the first one to get paid. I'm not taking anything from you. So I think, Brian, that was really the issue and the messaging, how we got around it. I'll be honest, with the group, reaching out to your regional lenders and getting that participation early and understanding the challenges is one of those things you kind of want to do upfront and be prepared for.
Great. Thank you, George. That spawned one more question from Vicky.
Yeah, so George, I just want to follow up with this question. So the restriction itself is you're going to put the restriction itself ahead of the mortgage, correct?
Correct.
But what about the financing for the restriction? Would that stand behind the mortgage that's already, say, on the property, or a bank's mortgage? How does that work for you?
Yes. So in a situation, Vicky, where we have an existing home, right, and we're acquiring the deed restriction, not as part of a transaction, not a home buyer buying a property and then placing the deed restriction on it as part of that transaction, but instead already, owning a home, having a deed of trust, having a mortgage on that property, coming to us and selling us a deed restriction. That's the situation where we require the subordination agreement to be signed by the lender, subordinating their deed of trust without breaking chain of title, subordinating their deed of trust to our deed restriction, essentially acknowledging that they acknowledge the presence of the deed restriction on the property that they already have a loan on.
And do you have a mortgage for do you have a mortgage on like for your deed restriction, or no?
No.
Okay.
No, we're all cash.
Okay, so that's interesting. This is interesting because it's very similar to what we do in Massachusetts for, say, affordable housing restrictions. We have an affordable housing restriction that has to sit in first place, and then the mortgages that come that for buyers of these properties sit behind the mortgage, sit behind the restriction, so that if there is a foreclosure, the restriction doesn't get wiped out.
That's
the
correct.
Property stays, deed restricted in perpetuity. And so the lender, even if they foreclose, they're going to foreclose on a piece of property that still has this restriction. And that property is then going to get resold to somebody with that restriction on it.
Correct.
Right. And that's exactly how we handle affordable housing here as well. So we can use that as our model for doing this. Yeah. Thank you.
Penny, did that inspire a question? I think I saw you. Yeah, go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. I just want to make sure we don't forget about Mike Herlihy, who's patiently had his hand up for like an hour.
I am amazed with his patience and very appreciative.
Thank you.
I will not forget. So with that, I'll jump right to Mr. Herlihy.
George, I'm gonna try and be quick here. If I want to go back to 2018, when somehow you came up with a goal of increasing the number of these indeed property restrictions by 1,000 dwellings. If my math is right, and having listened to you, you're targeting to get 15% of the remaining dwellings in the community deed restricted for local residents, were given the restrictions within a period of 10 years, and you're thinking you can accomplish that a year early. Is that?
Yes, but again, Mike, we acquired these deed restrictions, that 1,000 unit deed restriction. Not all of them are deed restriction purchases on existing homes. Some of those transactions include deed restrictions we will purchase as part of new development.
New builds, okay,
Yeah.
but still, 10%, you're gonna increase it, the local residency in perpetuity, at least 10%, right?
Yes.
Or 7%, how did you set the 1,000 number?
Sure. Well, it was, you know, if you get to know me better, Mike, you'll learn pretty quickly. I'm pretty basic, and I could do the math that was simple, and I needed a message that I could communicate to the community pretty easily. And that was 1,000, 100 times 10 is 1,000. I thought we could get 100 of these a year for 10 years. So 100 times 10 equals 1,000. And that's how we came up with 1,000. As I shared last night in my remarks, we are within the region, we are short by anywhere from 5,000 to 6,000 residential dwelling units and growing by the day. We're losing housing stock by the day in the community. So to go out with a goal of 5,000 or 6,000 homes was just unrealistic. But coming up with something that we thought was achievable, with some effort, with some serious effort, would carry the day. They have since, with our successes, they have since now challenged us to come up with an additional 1,000 deed restricted units by, I think it's 2038 in the community. So I've learned the lesson that if you overachieve, you're just going to get more work handed to you. But the answer to the, go ahead.
So George, just to save a little time here, the answer to your question is leadership is the way you accomplished it.
Yes. Well, yeah.
Very well done. Congratulations.
But also, messaging and going back, Mike, to keeping it simple. If there's that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? Well, we've got an elephant in front of us on the dinner table, and I think so many of our challenges leading up to some of our more recent successes is we looked at this problem in its totality, and everybody threw up their hand and said impossible. When the reality was, let's pare this down, let's chunk it down, let's start realizing some successes. And then, as I shared last night, success begets success. Build that credibility. So many of our issues around the housing issue was everyone wanted to ferret out, why something wouldn't work before we even had a chance to give it a try. And I said, let's just give it a try. And if it doesn't work again, we'll throw it out. We'll start over. But maybe we give it a try and we course correct, along the way until we actually get the results we want to get. There's that adage about, an airplane flying from New York to Chicago, 90% of the time, it's not even on course. It's constantly, the computer is constantly correcting its course. But at the end of the flight, you knock on wood, you land in Chicago. But so it's that, Mike. It's trying to take what was an overwhelming problem and get the commitment behind it to at least begin to make some inroads. And then again, success begets success.
Well, it's a pleasure getting to know you, George.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mike. So I've opened to members of the public. Are there any other members of the public that have any questions for George? Seeing none, I'll give one last opportunity to board members. Seeing none there. George, thank you very much for your time today. We are incredibly appreciative to have you share your experience and successes and have you as a resource as we follow your lead, hopefully.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm honored to be able to participate. And Tucker has he has a direct line to my cell phone and my laptop here. So don't hesitate to reach out if you guys have questions. And again, thank you for all the hospitality while we've been here. I appreciate it.
Well, Brian, I want to thank George once again. We just can't express our appreciation enough. And George, or excuse me, Brian, we have to make good on a promise I made to George at the Vail Symposium that Nantucket would have a form of Vail Indeed by next spring.
Great.
I love it. Let's do it. All right, so with that, we have some marching orders. Judy, Vicky, team, let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. I'll close, let's see, item 5, move to other business, next meeting, August 8th, via Zoom. I'm assuming that timing is the same as at 12:30. It's not listed on here.
If it works for the members, we're gonna plan for 12:30.
Okay, great. Any objections? Seeing none, we'll plan for 12:30. Are there any board comments? Seeing none, I guess I'll look for item 8. Tucker, we're headed to executive session today. Is it listed or are we headed there?
That was just a placeholder. We do not need to today.
Okay, excellent. With that, we'll close item 8. Item 9, I'll look for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
Second,
I heard a couple. Penny made the motion, Dave by roll call, Dave Iverson,
aye.
Tom Dixon,
Aye.
Rima Sherry,
Aye.
Chantal Murphy,
Aye.
Penny Dye,
Aye.
Meg Browers,
Aye.
and Brian Sullivan's and I. This is a great meeting. Thank you so much, George. Really, really appreciate it.
Very good.
Ton of info. Let's get this
George.
out onto the interweb so people can watch it.
Get it going on.
Thanks, everybody. Until Tuesday.